welcome to the June 8th, 2020 meeting of the City of Raleigh Board of Adjustment. My name is Rodney Swink, and I'm chair of the board. I'm joined this morning by other commissioners. John Kuntz is our vice chairman, Donald Miles, our secretary, Kathy Rudisell and Justin Sutton are city appointments, Marvin Butler is our county alternate, Stephen Kinney and Michael Rainey are city alternates. We'll have staff introduced later. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're conducting this meeting using a remote electronic platform. I would ask for your patience today as we proceed. There may be slight delays as we transition between speakers, participants, and presentations. The Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial body that is governed by the North Carolina General Statutes and the city's Unified Development Ordinance. We conduct evidentiary hearings on requests for variances, design adjustments, design alternates, and special use permits, among other requests. Before we begin the evidentiary hearings on today's agenda, I would like to provide some important information about the steps taken to ensure that each party's due process rights are protected as we proceed in this remote platform. First, today's meeting will be conducted in accordance with the newly enacted statutes in Session Law 2020-3, which allow for remote meetings and quasi-judicial hearings during declarations of emergency. Second, each applicant on today's agenda was notified before being placed on the agenda that this meeting would be conducted using a remote electronic platform. Every applicant on today's agenda has consented to the board conducting the evidentiary hearing on their request using this remote platform. We will also confirm today at the start of each evidentiary hearing that the participants in the evidentiary hearing consent to the matter proceeding in this remote platform. If there is any objection to a matter proceeding in this remote platform, the case will be continued. Third, notice of this meeting was provided to the applicants and the public in numerous ways, well beyond the legal requirements for noticing this meeting and the evidentiary hearings. Specifically, notice of today's evidentiary hearings was provided by mail to all property owners within 100 feet of each subject property. The mail notices were sent in advance of the date set by law to provide such notice, and each notice letter notified the recipient of the remote meeting platform. The letters also stated to contact the city immediately if there were any objections to the evidentiary hearing for which the notice was sent or to the remote meeting platform. Let me emphasize, no case is proceeding today in which the city has been contacted by an individual with an objection to the case or to the matter being heard in this remote meeting platform. Notice was also provided by posting notice on the site of each property, publishing notice in the newspaper, and providing notice on the city's website. Each notice method was also done in advance of the legal requirement to provide such notice. The notices for today's meeting contained information about the means by which the public can access the remote meeting as the meeting occurs. Fourth, any individual wishing to participate in today's evidentiary hearings was required to sign up prior to the meeting to participate. Information about this sign-up requirement, along with information about how to sign up to participate, was included in the mailed notice letters sent to each property owner within 100 feet of each subject property. This information was also included on the board's website, and among other information, a link to the board's website was included in all methods of notice. Again, I emphasize, no case is proceeding today in which anyone contacted the city to voice an objection to a request or the remote meeting platform. All individuals participating in today's evidentiary hearings were also required to submit a copy of any presentation, document, exhibit, or other material that they wish to submit at the evidentiary hearing prior to today's meeting. All materials that the city received from the participants in today's cases, as well as a copy of the city staff's presentations and documents, were posted online in a board docs prior to this meeting. All materials that will be discussed today can be viewed at any time during today's meeting by visiting www.raleighNC.gov/board-adjustment and clicking the link to view the agenda. Finally, all individuals who signed up to participate in an evidentiary hearing on today's agenda, as well as all city staff participants, were emailed a witness oath form prior to today's meeting. Any individual planning to testify or submit evidence in an evidentiary hearing was notified they must sign the oath form prior to today's meeting. We will also reaffirm everyone's oath on the record at today's meeting. Before we begin the evidentiary hearings on today's agenda, I would like to ask our attorney to briefly explain for the participants how we will be conducting today's evidentiary hearings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Catherine Hoffman-Hill, and I'm the attorney for the Raleigh Board of Adjustment. Today's evidentiary hearings will proceed very similar to a regular meeting with a few minor adjustments. If at any time a participant has issues with technology, please send a message to the moderator. Beth Stagner, the IT Assistant Director, is moderating this meeting. She is in WebEx, but you cannot see her, I do not believe. The chat function has been disabled for this meeting for all participants and the board members, except for the ability to message the moderator if you have technical difficulties. We'll start each evidentiary hearing by reading the list of participants who have signed up to participate in the case. I will call each individual separately and ask you to state your name and address and confirm for the record that you consent to proceeding in this remote platform. The board chair will then ask you to reaffirm your oath on the record. Staff will then provide their presentation, and then the board members will be given an opportunity to ask questions. The applicant will then be acknowledged to present their case. The board will acknowledge the attorney or applicant for each case first as the point person for the case. Attorneys and applicants, when you call your witnesses, please introduce and state the name of your witness before they speak. We also ask that you pause after each witness so that the board members can ask any questions they have before you proceed with your next witness. Also, applicants and attorneys, you provided your potential documents, presentations, exhibits, and other materials ahead of the meeting. And as a reminder, please make sure to submit your evidence in the record when you present your case. At the end of the applicant's presentation, we will ask if city staff would have any additional information or questions to add. And the board will also hear from any other participants who have signed up to speak in support or opposition of the request. And again, no case is proceeding today where somebody has signed up to participate in opposition of a request. When all testimony is complete, the board will close the evidentiary hearing and will deliberate on the item. Following deliberation, the board's chair will ask for a motion, and the board will vote using a roll call method with the assistant city clerk taking the vote. So I will now turn this over to the board's chair to conduct the evidentiary hearing.
Thank you. I'd like to start by swearing in all potential staff witnesses for today's cases. When I say your name, please acknowledge that you're present, and then I will administer your oath. Keegan McDonald, planning staff case presenter.
Present.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in the evidentiary hearings of today's meeting will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Eric Hodge, planning staff case presenter.
Present.
Present. Okay. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in the evidentiary hearing at today's meeting will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Justin Romero, zoning administrator.
Present.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in the evidentiary hearings at today's meeting will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Brittany Waddell, assistant planning director.
Present.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in the evidentiary hearings at today's meeting will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you and welcome. We will now call the cases in the order they appear on the agenda. Starting with case 1, 1723 Crossroads Arbor Way. This is a variance, Board of Adjustment 0018-2019.
Okay, and I'll go ahead and start, Mr. Chair, with the participant list. We have 5 people signed up to speak on this matter. Isabel Maddox, Jeff McDermott, John Diltz, Scott Burnett, and Robert Berner. When I state your name, please, or when I call you, please state your name and address for the record. And please confirm for the record your consent to proceed in this remote format. Isabel Maddox.
Here, and I consent to proceed remotely.
Isabel, would you mind giving us your address too?
My address is PO Box 946, Raleigh 27602.
Okay.
Okay, Ms. Maddox, I'm going to read the oath to you. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
All right, Jeff McDermott.
Jeff McDermott, yes. Blue Sky Restoration Contractors. Address is 5201 Old Pool Road, Suite 106, Raleigh. I also give consent.
Mr. McDermott, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay.
Okay, John Diltz. John, it looks like your microphone's on mute. I see you on the line. There you go.
John Diltz, 7875 Black Horse Run, Winston, Georgia. And I do give my consent.
Okay, Mr. Diltz, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
All right, Scott Burnett.
My address, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
My address is 2920 First Avenue South, Birmingham, Alabama, 35233. And I do consent.
Thank you, Mr. Burnett. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, and Robert Bruner. And Robert, we can see you. It looks like your mic's on mute. Can you hear us?
Robert's had some audio for us to be able to hear him. We did hear him at the beginning of the meeting, and he had to finagle something with his audio.
Okay, we can give him a second. Would you mind, Isabel is the attorney for this case. Isabel, we'll need to have Robert come on and give his consent to proceed. I don't know if you wanted to start your case and have him come in before the board closes the evidentiary hearing, or if you want to go to the next case and wait to make sure he gets on. It's up to you.
I don't really anticipate needing to call Mr. Bruner. So can we just proceed with our case?
Yes, we will need to get him on the line before the board closes the evidentiary hearing to confirm his consent to the remote format since he signed up to participate. But if you want to start your case while he works on that, that would be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Let me add, if he continues to have some difficulties, if Scott or Isabel can message me, we could drop him from this and the meeting could call him on a regular phone so we could hear him as well. That's an option.
Yeah, I mean, so Beth, can you confirm what you need me or Scott or to do to make that happen?
Yeah, if Scott or if Robert himself wants to put a phone number in the chat. Scott's saying that he can speak, but I think Catherine really needs to hear Robert because he got signed up. Is that correct, Catherine?
Correct. We're proceeding under this new statute that requires the participants to consent to the remote format in order for the meeting to be held in this format.
So Scott, if we can't hear Robert, I've got Robert's phone number. So if Isabel wants to start, I can just have the meeting call Robert and then we can patch him through.
That would work.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to start with our staff. Keegan McDonald will do the staff presentation. So Keegan, you want to get us started?
Yes, absolutely. So before I start with the presentation, I will just read the nature of request from the agenda. Whereas Enclave at Crossroads LLC, property owner requests a variance for complete relief from the 2-foot minimum ground floor elevation requirement set forth in sections 157B and 324F1 of the Unified Development Ordinance in order to rebuild a 16-unit apartment building on a 20.45 acre property zoned RX3 CU and SHOD 1 located at 1723 Crossroads Arbor Way. Now, bear with me one moment as I move to present. Apologies, just one moment as we move the presenter ball over.
No problem.
Okay, thank you for bearing with me. So this particular request is related to an apartment complex. You can see the aerial image shown here. It is for a particular structure within the overall complex. The zoning of the property is RX3CU. It does have a SHOD 1 overlay, a special highway overlay district 1. However, that is not implicated in the particular requirement that's being, that relief is being requested for. Here in this particular slide, you can see highlighted in red the particular structure. So in February 2019, there was a fire that caused significant damage to the structure, necessitating that it be torn down and rebuilt. The applicant in this instance is seeking relief from the minimum ground floor elevation requirement. What that requires is that the ground floor of the structure be a minimum 2 feet above average curb level. There are some specific exhibits that I believe the applicant will be showing during their presentation, but essentially it will be slightly below that 2 foot mark. And the purpose for the request is to reuse the existing foundation on the site as a means to rebuild the structure, and that foundation doesn't currently meet the minimum 2 foot elevation requirement. And so staff actually does not have any comment related to the 4 variance criteria on this application, but I am happy to answer any questions if there are any from the board.
Okay, thank you. Board members, are any questions for Mr. McDonald? No? Okay, let us move on to the applicant, Ms. Maddox.
Good morning. I'm Isabel Maddox. I've already given my address. Here on behalf of Enclave Crossroads LLC. As Mr. McDonald indicated, the property for which we're requesting a variance is part of a multi-building apartment complex on sort of the southwest edge of Raleigh, near Crossroads shopping area, which you've probably been to. It's located where Jones Franklin Road intersects with I-40 behind Dillard Drive Middle School. We have a large team of design and construction professionals online that are available should any technical questions arise. On February 13th, 2019, there was a serious, an accidental fire at the complex that destroyed 16 units and left the building at 1723 Crossroads Arbor uninhabitable with no roof, requiring demolition. And I have a slide, which is, I think, slide exhibit 4 on my presentation that shows that there's a location, and you can see the aerial view of the burned out building, the charred remains. It was not, repairable. So they basically had to tear it down. Also, I have a slide 4, which shows before it was torn down, boarded up building, which looks a little bit like downtown Raleigh right now. But this doesn't even exist anymore. So they were in the process of rebuilding. They realized there's this requirement that was not in place when this apartment complex was constructed some years ago. and they seek to use the existing slab, which allows the buildings to be sort of harmonious with the other buildings. So you don't have anything that's, jarringly out of place. But we were therefore requesting complete relief from the requirement in section 3.2.4.f.1 and 1.5.7.b that the finished floor elevation be 2 feet above the street. Now, it's kind of a strange requirement because we're not really on a street or on a parking lot, but the city staff has been enforcing this, and it's a little bit unclear, do you enforce it all around the building or just along the parking lot? So for that reason, we asked for complete relief, even though in some places it appears that we don't need the full 2 feet. The requirement did not exist in 1999 when this project was built. So the foundation is not the full 2 feet above the street or the parking lot or whatever we're measuring this requirement from. We feel like unnecessary hardship would result from the strict application of this requirement and cause practical difficulties for the property owner. We feel like this would require complete demolition of the existing foundation, regrading the area, which would be wasteful, environmentally more damaging, and just building from the existing slab, which is not harmed, and would also be a disturbance to the other apartment residents in the area. It would take more time and more expense, and cause more disruption. We feel like this hardship is a result of conditions that are peculiar to this property. This fire was very peculiar to this property. And there are 23 other occupied apartment buildings still on the property, which would be affected should we have to tear out that foundation. And we want to build it in the most efficient way. We do have a topographic challenge here, and there's already been a full grading of the site and placing of these buildings in a way that the buildings work together. And from these slides, you'll see that there are places where the amount of the variance needed is really less than a foot. But because depending on where you measure it, you might need, half a foot here or a full foot there. We're just asking for a complete relief to just use the existing foundation so that we don't have to get into an issue every time, from various different points on the site. We feel like the other issues that we face here are there's an existing retaining wall that might be affected should we have to regrade. There are ADA accessibility issues. If you raise this building, you're going to have to make it, do certain things to make it ADA accessible. That we feel like the building, if rebuilt to the way it was before, works well. These hardships did not result from any actions taken by the property owner. The fire was accidental. I think it was started by a cigarette left unattended that ended up catching the building on fire. We believe the variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance, such that public safety is secured and substantial justice done. This requirement, which I think staff will confirm, it's left a lot of head scratching what the purpose is. I think it may be for urban areas where somebody walking down a busy sidewalk can look straight into your apartment. This is not an urban area. It's more of a suburban apartment complex. We do believe it has public benefits in that it will be able to reuse the foundation, will reduce land disturbance, reduce landfill impacts, and it will be consistent in size and character to the existing buildings. So in conclusion, we would say that the hardships are created by the 2019 fire, the existing topographical challenges in this area, the existing building environment with multiple apartment buildings and want this to fit in and be harmonious with the others. And we do think this has got public benefits in that it will allow us to build the building back in a more responsible manner. I and my other design and construction team are available for specific questions should you have any. So please let us know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Maddox. Board members, do you have any questions for Ms. Maddox? Ms. Maddox, do you have any more witnesses you wish to call?
No, not unless there are questions.
Okay. Staff, do you have any questions for the applicant?
No, we have no further questions.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'm going to open this up. Is there anyone else here who wishes to speak in support of this request? Anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to the request? Do we need to get Mr. Bruner's consent at this point?
That would be great. It looks like he is on the line. So Beth, do you want to confirm that for us?
Yep, he's unmuted on the phone now.
Okay, great. Mr. Bruner, can you please state your name and address, and then also confirm for the record your consent to proceed in this remote format? And then the board's chair will reaffirm your oath for the record.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My address is 2920 First Avenue South, Birmingham, Alabama, 35233. And yes, I consent.
Okay, Mr. Bruner, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, since if there are no further board questions or staff questions, we will close the evidentiary hearing, and I'll open it up for board deliberation or a motion.
John Koontz, I motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Mile, thank you for the second. Any further discussion? We'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Puccini?
If you would please take down the presentation because I can't see everybody. I cannot see everybody. Could someone please take down the presentation?
That would be Keegan. Keegan, do you have the ability to close presentation? There you go.
Thank you, Keegan. All righty. Thank you. Mr. Swink?
Affirm, I agree.
Thank you. Mr. Koontz?
Approve.
Mr. Mile?
Approve.
Ms. Rudisil?
Approve.
Mr. Sutton?
Approve.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's move on to our second case, 7830 Brecken Way. It's a variance case, BOA 0022-2020.
Okay, and I'll start by calling, we have 3 people signed up to participate in this case, Jim Eatman, Marcy Tolley, and Frank Blue. When I state your name, please state your name and your address and confirm your consent to this remote proceeding. Jim Eatman?
My name is Jim Eatman. Address is 4130 Park Lake Avenue, 100 Raleigh, NC 27612. And I consent to the
Mr. Eatman, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
All right, Marcy Tolley?
Hi, I'm Marcy Tolley. I'm 7830 Brecken Way in Raleigh, and I give consent to participate this way.
Ms. Tolley, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
And Frank Blue?
My name is Frank Blue. Address is 8308 Hardith Way, Raleigh, North Carolina 27616, and I consent.
Mr. Blue, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Let's move on, Mr. McDonald, our staff presentation.
Okay, I will read the nature of request. Whereas Marcy Tolley, property owner, requests a 3-foot variance and a 10.6-foot variance to the side lot line and rear yard setback requirements, respectively, set forth in sections 223C3 and 223C4 of the Unified Development Ordinance, in order to install glass panels on an existing screened porch with a side lot line setback of 3 feet and a rear yard setback of 9.4 feet on a 0.04 acre property zoned R6 located at 7830 Brecken Way. So as you can see from the aerial, this request pertains to an existing townhome. This particular property is zoned R6. Of note, because the requirements for townhouses only currently exist for the R10 zoning district. Townhouses currently are not permitted newly built within the R6 district, so they take their standards from the R10 district. This particular district requires a 20-foot rear yard setback for any conditioned space. It also requires a 0 or 6-foot setback for the side yard, which allows for a party wall in the case of a townhome. If there is not a party wall, then the 6-foot separation needs to be maintained between the two structures. Here is just an aerial image, and I think this actually highlights it better. As you can see, this townhome development, like others that were developed prior to the UDO, of course, exist kind of in a non-conforming manner due to the small lot sizes. The individual structures take up a majority of the lot, as you can see here, and as will be evident on the plot plan further in the presentation. But this is of note just because the existing structure as it sits today is non-conforming and is part of what's necessitating variance for relief from the rear yard and side yard setbacks to legalize the creation of a sunroom on the property. Here is a survey just showing the lot as it's situated next to its neighbors, so slightly offset here, but again, a townhouse development, and it shares property lines with two townhomes, and this is slightly angled, and the property to the north west being lot 41, they share a party wall along this sunroom. On the other side, adjacent to lot 43, is where there is a minor separation between the edge of the proposed sunroom and the lot line. Here is an image of the plot plan submitted for this particular request, and I'm going to jump to the next slide to show a zoomed in version. So as you can see, there's an existing screened porch that maintains a 9.4-foot setback with the rear property line. The applicant is seeking to install glass panels within or onto this screened porch, and the installation of glass panels is viewed both as an intensification of the existing use and also necessitates compliance with the primary or principal structure setbacks. So in this case, to reiterate, a 20-foot rear yard setback has to be maintained and a 0 or 6-foot setback has to be maintained on the side yard. So what is shown is a 9.4 foot setback in the rear and only a 3-foot setback on the side. And staff has a few comments related to the variance criteria, so I will go through those. For criteria number 1, that unnecessary hardship would result from strict application of the ordinance. The applicants do have an existing legal non-conforming porch on their property, and while the UDO does allow for certain setback encroachments, there is no encroachment allowance for sunrooms, nor is it inherent to the code that sunrooms be permitted within these districts. They are viewed as part of the principal structure and have to adhere to the setback requirements. For variance criteria number 2, that the hardship results from conditions that are peculiar to the property, such as location, size, or topography. While some neighboring townhouses may already comply with the applicable setback standards, all properties were remapped at the same time and thus are required to comply from that point forward with the setback requirements. So this condition about the principal structure setback does apply to all of the adjoining properties that are zoned R6 and that are of the townhouse building type. Criteria number 3, that the hardship did not result from actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. The applicants are choosing to install windows on the existing screened-in porch, which necessitates compliance with the principal structure setbacks. This action increases the degree of nonconformity of the detached house, creating a rear yard setback of 9.4 feet. In criteria number 4, that the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance, such that public safety is secured and substantial justice is achieved. Just to reiterate, as in the past, setbacks are designed to provide adequate daylighting and ensure privacy and create open spaces for individual activity and relaxation. While the existing porch is not being expanded in any way, either vertically or laterally, the code and interpretation of the code does consider the installation of glass paneling to be an intensification, and encroaching further than the allowable setback could potentially impact the spirit, purpose, and intent of these regulations. And I did want to note the applicant has proposed one condition in their application, and to reiterate that the height, width, and footprint of the existing non-conforming structure, in this case the screened porch, will not be altered or increased. It's just an installation of glass paneling within that structure. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Okay, great. Thank you. Board members, any questions for Mr. McDonald? No? Okay, thank you. Let's go to Mr. Eatman for your presentation, the applicant's case.
Mr. Eatman, it looks like your microphone is on mute. I don't know if Beth can help unmute. Jim?
Jim Eatman?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Okay, can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Great. My name is Jim Eatman. I'm an attorney at Lynch & Eatman here in Raleigh. As was said, I'm here on behalf of Mrs. Marcy Tolley, the property owner at 7830 Brecken Way, and she is present with us at the meeting today. We're here to request a variance to the setback requirements in 2.2.3C3 and 2.2.3C4 of the UDO. Again, as the city staff mentioned, these variances are being requested in connection with Mrs. Tolley's desire to replace mesh screen windows on her existing back porch. That porch is currently encroaching on the rear lot line setback and on the side lot line setback on the south side of the property. Mrs. Tolley has contracted with Patio Enclosures to prepare plans and perform the work on this porch. We'll show those plans shortly, but we have Mr. Frank Blue from Patio Enclosures here today in case you all have any questions. Before we get into further detail regarding the request and the showings required for a variance, I'd like to provide a brief background and a little bit of context. Keegan, if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so as Keegan mentioned, this is part of a townhome, part of the Baker's Landing subdivision. It was built in 1982. Mrs. Tolley has owned it since 95. Excuse me. It's a 228 square foot roofed porch. It's currently enclosed with those screen windows that Mrs. Tolley wants to replace with glass. And the rear lot line is bordering the common area. Keegan, if you could go to the next slide, please. Here's some of the existing conditions, a few photos of the porch. You can see the mesh windows that we would like to replace. If you're facing the porch here, you can see that shared party wall on the right. The left side of the porch would be the south side of the property where we are requesting the 3-foot variance. And if we could go to the next slide. Here's some pictures from inside the porch. Again, looking out through the mesh window onto the common area. You can see the interior of the porch here. We are putting glass on, but we're not air conditioning it. There's no HVAC work, no plumbing work, no electrical work being done. Again, just glassing in this mesh porch. And Keegan, if you could move to the next slide, please. Here are some of the proposed plans done by Frank Blue, who again is here today and is happy to answer any questions you may have. You can see the design of the porch is not changing. The footprint, the height, dimensions, no further encroachment, no increase in the degree of existing encroachment. Just simple plans here, and this is obviously facing the back side of the porch. And if we can move to the next slide, please. Here's an elevation, side elevation shot here. Again, you can see not doing any major work on the side. We're going to put that glass panel on there, no change to the stairs. So pretty straightforward plans here. And I believe we have one more shot of the plans. Keegan, if you will move to the next slide. Here's the floor plan. Remains unchanged from its existing encroachment, and will not be changing the footprint here at all. So now that we've looked at proposed plans and a little background, I'd like to move on to the exact specific encroachments here. So Keegan, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Here we have again, as the city staff mentioned, the rear lot line setback is 20 feet. The side lot line setback must be either 0 or 6 feet. We right now have a encroachment of 10 feet 6 inches into the rear lot line, and we have an encroachment of 3 feet into the existing side lot line setback on the south side of the property. And Keegan, if you could go to the next slide, please. Here are the variances, again, that we're requesting. Very straightforward here, just variance of 10 feet 6 inches to the rear lot line setback, and a variance of 3 feet to the side lot line setback on the south side of the property. And again, the proposed condition here is that this work will not increase at all the degree of the existing encroachment. And Keegan, if you could go to the next slide here. So if I could now address the 4 showings required for a variance, first, that a strict application of the ordinances would result in an unnecessary hardship. In this case, the unnecessary hardship for Mrs. Tolley is created in that it prevents her from making minor improvements to the porch that are both necessary and desirable for several reasons. Putting in these glass windows will increase the value of her home. It'll increase the energy efficiency of her home. This is an older home. It was built in 1982. And even though the porch won't be air conditioned, it will obviously have a better seal with those glass panels. This will improve security. Obviously, it's much easier to break through a mesh screen than it is a glass window. And Mrs. Tolley has indicated that there have been previously break-ins through screened-in porches in this neighborhood. These improvements will increase the utility and the usable area of Mrs. Tolley's home. It creates more of a finished space so that you could put indoor furniture or electronics, valuables, things you wouldn't put outside on a screened porch that let in elements or that easily broken into. And then this will also allow Mrs. Tolley to replace outdated and deteriorating infrastructure. Mesh screens don't last forever, and they often need repair replacement. Glass would last much longer and obviously require less ongoing maintenance. So for these reasons, we do feel that strict application of the ordinances in this case create an unnecessary hardship on Mrs. Tolley. And then we can move on to the second showing here. Keegan, if you will move on to the next slide, please. That the hardships result from conditions that are peculiar to the property. These hardships result as they're a result of the size of the property and the orientation of the structure on the property. Although there are some other houses or townhomes in this neighborhood that violate the setback, there are others that do not. It's more of a matter of the size of the lot, the size of the home, and the orientation on the home. You can see from this tax map here on this slide, just from a bird's eye view, some of these townhomes are clearly in compliance or appear to be in compliance with setbacks, or at least there's appears to be a lot more room to comply with the setbacks than there is on Mrs. Tolley's highlighted property there. So we would contend that that is not something that's peculiar to the, or excuse me, it is something that's peculiar to the property and not applicable to the general public, and really not applicable at least 100% to the neighborhood. And Keegan, if you can move on to the next slide, please. I'll discuss the third showing here, that the hardship does not result from actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. This nonconformance was created when the UDO was adopted. This was built, the townhome was built in 1982 in the same footprint it has now. Mrs. Tolley was never notified of any encroachments at the time she became the owner. She's done nothing to increase the degree of encroachment during her time of the ownership. So we feel for those reasons that the hardship does not result from her actions. Rather, it really results from adoption of the UDO, creating these new setbacks that ultimately was already not in compliance with. So Keegan, if we could move on to the next slide, please. The fourth required showing that the variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance. Keegan discussed the specifics of the spirit, purpose, and intent, and I think generally speaking, it is to preserve safety and privacy of individual property owners, both from their neighbors and rights of way, and also to promote uniform development. And we believe Mrs. Tolley's proposed improvements are consistent with that. Replacing mesh with glass will reduce or eliminate any sound or smell or anything that would otherwise come out of the porch and possibly interfere with someone else's use of their property. It's also consistent with the appearance of the neighborhood. Many other townhomes in Baker's Landing already have glassed-in porches, including some of Mrs. Tolley's neighbors. And this change has already been approved by the HOA, the Baker's Landing HOA. So we feel that this won't have any, given that it's a simple change that's not increasing the existing encroachment that has been there since 1982. We think this is consistent with the public health, safety, and welfare, and if anything, promotes those. Keegan, if you'll move on to the next slide, I'll go ahead and briefly conclude just by reiterating our request. We are requesting a variance of 10 feet 6 inches to the rear lot line setback, requesting a variance of 3 feet to the side lot line setback on the south side of the property, And we are proposing the condition that the improvements will cause no increase in the degree of encroachment on these requirements. At this time, I'd like to ask if the board has any questions or concerns that I can address. And if not, that concludes our presentation, and we appreciate your time, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eatman. Board members, any questions for Mr. Eatman? Nope. Staff, do you want to have any other questions for Mr. Eatman?
No, we have no further comments.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in support of this request? Or anyone else here who wishes to speak in opposition to this request? Anything further from anyone? And we'll close the hearing and we'll move to the board for deliberations. I'll entertain a motion.
John Coons, motion to approve.
Excuse me, was that Mr. Coons?
Yes, sir. Motion to approve.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Mile, thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor, we will do by roll call vote.
Thank you. Mr. Coons?
Approve.
Mr. Mile?
Approve.
Mr. Swank?
Approve.
Ms. Rudisell?
Approve.
Thank you. Mr. Sutton?
Approve.
Thank you.
I have a quick clarification. Staff introduced that there was a condition associated with this. He introduced it. We did not hear any discussion of that. Do we need to acknowledge that that was part of this vote?
Yeah, and I apologize. I'm assuming you're approving as requested, which the request included a condition from the applicant, but I think it'd be a good idea to state that to clarify for the record. I believe Mr. Kuntz made the motion. If you could clarify your motion was to, and I think you're on mute right now. Looks like you're speaking, but your motion was to approve as requested.
Approve as requested, correct. Approve as requested.
The condition that, I just had it, that reads, give me 1 second. This is from the application. The height, width, and footprint of the existing non-conforming structure will not be altered or increased.
Correct. Approve with conditions. Motion to approve with conditions as requested.
I mean, if that was your motion was to approve as requested, I think that you voted on that already, Mr. Swink.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure that since that was mentioned, I should have made So we're good?
I think you're good.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Eatman. Thank you, Ms. Raleigh. Let's move on to our third case for the morning, 1303 Boyer Street. This also is a variance, BOA-0019-2020.
Okay, and you have 3 participants sign up for this case: Kenneth Haywood, Yossi, and John Carmeyer. When I state your name, please give your name and your address and confirm your consent to proceed in this remote format. Kenneth Haywood.
The address is 5410 Trinity Road, Suite 210 in Raleigh, and yes, I consent.
Mr. Haywood, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Okay, Yossi, I'll let you pronounce your full name for us.
Joseph Heffetz, and I reside at 709 East Lenore Street, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27601, and I consent.
Okay, Mr. Heffetz, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, and John Carmeyer.
Wake Forest, North Carolina, 7587, and I consent.
Could you repeat your address, please? I think we missed part of it.
Yes, sir. 7317 Rocky Ridge Road, Wake Forest, NC, 27587.
Great, thank you. Mr. Carmeyer, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do, sir. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. So the nature of request here is for a 10.3-foot variance to the rear yard setback requirements set forth in section 2.2.1.b.4 of the Unified Development Ordinance that would result in a rear setback of 9.7 feet. In order to legalize the existing detached house located on the lot, as well as construct a second floor addition to the existing house, and to construct the rear porch on the house that would result in a 5.7-foot rear porch setback on a 0.5 acre parcel. For the porch, it's a 5.3-foot variance from section 1.5.4.d.1.a. So, and again, the property is zoned residential 10 and located at 1303 Boyer Street. So, single-family dwellings and detached homes in the R10 zoning district are supposed to have a 20-foot rear yard setback. As noted, this existing house currently sits 9.7 feet shy of that requirement. 10.3 feet shy of that requirement with a 9.7-foot rear yard setback. Porches are allowed to encroach into rear setbacks such that they would maintain an 11-foot rear yard setback. So the differential between the existing 5.7-foot setback and the 5.3-foot variance for the porch equates to that 11-foot measurement. So this lot, at some point in the past, the rear yard, in essence, was recombined or subdivided off and appears to go with a parcel that fronts on the street around the corner, which is St. Augustine Avenue. And so it's resulted in a non-conforming structure where it's too close to that rear property line. If you look at all the other parcels along Boyer to the east, you can see where they have deeper rear yards than this lot currently has the benefit of. So the parcel in the rear that has been subdivided off, again, is now under the same ownership as the parcel 2 lots up on St. Augustine Avenue. So it's resulted in a substandard lot. It's only 3 feet shy of the minimum of the district in terms of depth. However, the existing house that was constructed prior to the reconfiguration of the lot sits further back on the lot than it would otherwise be required. The home could have enjoyed a 10-foot setback from Boyer per today's regulations, and the porch could be as close actually as 3 feet from Boyer Street. However, the lot was reconfigured after the construction of the house in the past, and so it results in a shallow rear yard, and they're seeking to add a second story to increase the livability of the house. It's fairly small. I would note that the staff response to the finding number 4 has an error in it. It refers to a garage addition. It was a cut and paste error from a previous case. So we're just noting that setback regulations are intended to provide adequate and uniform spacing between structures on the properties. However, as I noted earlier, this property was the subject of a subdivision and or recombination, which resulted in the non-conforming situation that we have today. So they're not increasing the degree of non-conformity other than just going up. Staff has no additional comments unless you have any questions of me at this time.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Mr. Hodge? Hearing none. Okay, let's go on with the applicant's case. Mr. Haywood.
On behalf of the applicant, in this situation. I very much appreciate you and the members of the board to hear us today. Mr. Hodge, if you could, I think that you have some different slides that you had part of your presentation. If you could also show those so we could get a context for the members of the board to be able to see from an aerial perspective what you were previously referring to.
Eric, you're on mute. It looks like you're speaking, but on mute.
There we go. So you can see where the parcel says R10 behind the red parcel. That landlocked piece was formerly part of this lot and is now under the same ownership as this parcel that's to the second lot up from the corner. So that was the lot I was referring to that has been modified.
So, Mr. Chair and members of the board, I will say, again, welcome all of you. When I was a member of the Board of Adjustment, the use of a variance to provide relief from a setback dictated by our Uniform Development Ordinance seemed to be the most appropriate use when the applicant was seeking to legalize an otherwise non-conforming structure. What we have in this particular situation, members of the board, is that in 1935, this current dwelling was built in what was known and is known as the College Park subdivision. The original plat was platted in 1911, and when it was platted, the diagram that you see on your screen right now, our home is the one that shows you where the house is and all the various lines showing dimensions. Immediately to the left of that home, to the west, bordering St. Augustine's Avenue, originally those lots fronted on Boyer, but over time, in the 1930s, they were rotated 90 degrees to where they now front on St. Augustine's Avenue. And what you see is that the rear of our property, which says lot 68, is actually basically the backyard to the home that is on St. Augustine's Avenue that says lot 64 and 66. It's a home that is used by multiple different occupant owners. The current owner is not present, so we have an absentee owner situation. And basically, the lot behind us is a landlocked parcel that is not usable. There is no legal access to it, and it is essentially the rear yard to that home, which now fronts on St. Augustine's Avenue. The relevant part to be able to explain to everybody today is that this structure, since it was built in 1935, was before any of the current zoning regulations we have in the city today regarding setback regulations. There were no setback regulations back in 1935. And so this home was built 10.7 feet from the rear property line at that time. And of course, today that would result in a non-conforming use because it's closer to the rear property line than the required 20-foot setback. The home is on a very small lot. It's on a 0.05 acre parcel, and the existing residence is just a little over 700 square feet, which by today's standards would be applicable to a small apartment complex. The home over time, at the time that it was purchased by the current owner, was neglected. It had a fire at some point in time, and really was, by the time you consider today's building code standards, very difficult to be able to occupy or make use of a 700 square foot home, given what's required today to make current living spaces. So the current owner is seeking to add a second floor to be able to use this as a single family residence for the neighborhood. I will note that while we've been talking about a porch, it's really a 5-foot width step, rear step to the rear. It's just, it has a small little roof over it, but really it's just a 5-foot 11-foot structure to the rear that's just there with current staircase to get down to the backyard. It's not really what I would consider a porch type structure. So the nature of the request, as we've said, is a legalization. Mr. Hodge, can you walk through our PowerPoint presentation and get to the slide showing the existing site plan? Thank you. I think that this is helpful for everybody to see. This is the existing site plan. The dashed line that you see sort of in the first 1/3 from the rear, that notes where the current 20-foot setback requirement would be. So you would see based on that, you would have a good 1/3 of the existing foundation out of compliance. And the current property owner is seeking to use the existing foundation. They are not asking to encroach any further into the rear setback. They're going to use the existing foundation and simply come up from those piers on the existing foundation. And so I wanted you to see on this particular slide the impact of what a 20-foot rear setback variance would be. Moving forward on this, in terms of our evidence before you, is that we do not believe that legalizing this non-conforming use would create any issues for any of the surrounding property owners. As I've indicated, the property that would be most affected would be the one to the rear of us, which is a vacant lot, which is a landlocked parcel. So we do not believe that we would be creating any additional issues for that particular parcel behind us, given its particular situation to this particular case. When we look to the 4 findings that we're asking for the board to consider, the first finding, obviously, you've heard several times already today about unnecessary hardship or practical difficulty. If we strictly applied the current zoning law, that would make it so that this structure would not be able to be permitted. There really is no room to move the structure to the sides. And so given that it's a 0.05 acre parcel, it would render the usability of this home to be unusable because of a strict application. So we think there is a hardship since this is a structure that we're looking for in terms of legalization of a non-conforming use. It results in terms of number 2 from conditions that are particular to the property location and size, being the fact that it was built before the current zoning regulations. It did not, current hardship is not the result of any actions on behalf of the applicant. As I've indicated, the applicant chooses to use the existing foundation and will not increase any further encroachment into the rear setback. In terms of the 4th requirement, we believe that public safety is secured and substantial justice would be achieved by allowing this variance, because the tool of the variance within the zoning law is to be able to look at situations like this where you have a existing residence that was built before the zoning laws. It's non-conforming. You're seeking to conform it so the property owner can renovate this and make it a habitable structure for members of the public. And so for all those reasons, I respect the request that based on that information, the evidence and the record based on the application and the information that I provided today, that you put forth a motion for approval of this variance. I do have on the line with me John Carmeyer, who is the general contractor who is working on this, who could answer any questions for you. But otherwise, unless you have any questions for me, that would be our case.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Haywood. Board members, any questions for the applicant?
I have a question. Have the adjacent homeowners had any concerns or raised any concerns about the expansion of this house?
Ms. Rudisell, to answer your question, we have not, since the application has been filed, we have not heard anything from any of the other property owners. I think primarily because they're absent property owners, and the one that would be affected, like I said, is the one that is basically a rooming house. Several different rooms are leased out. And that particular home is not in very good condition if you were to see a street view side of it. And so we're trying to put something positive in the neighborhood, hopefully create some further renovations on the streets in this area, adding this new addition and this new improvement, which to a structure that really has not been modified in decades.
Staff did receive an email from the neighbor to the right or to the east of the property, Miss Melinda Delbridge. She just had questions as to why she was being notified about a rear setback on this property when she was a side yard neighbor to the property. So we explained the case to her, and she had no additional comments for staff.
Okay, thank you. Board members, any other questions? Mr. Hodge, do you have any questions for the applicant?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else here who wishes to speak in support of this request? Anyone else here wish to speak in opposition to this request? Without any further comments, we'll close the hearing and we'll open it up to the board for discussion and a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Ms. Rudisill. Is there a second?
Second the motion. That's Justin Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Appreciate that. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor will have a roll call vote.
Thank you. Ms. Rudisill?
Approve.
Mr. Sutton?
Approve.
Thank you. Mr. Swank?
Approve.
Thank you. Mr. Koontz?
Approve.
Thank you. Mr. Mile?
Approve.
Sure.
Great. Okay, thank you, Mr. Haywood. So now to our next hearing, number 4, 7201 Perry Creek Road. This is a special use permit request, Board of Adjustment 0016-2020.
Okay, Mr. Chair, there's 2 participants signed up for this case, Lucy Costello and Saeed Nori. When I state your name, please state your name for the record and give your address, and please also confirm your consent to proceed in this remote format. Lucy Costello.
7201 Perry Creek Road, Raleigh 27616. I consent.
Okay, Ms. Castillo, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, and Saeed Nori.
Yes, ma'am. 7201 Perry Creek Road, Raleigh, North Carolina 27616. I consent.
Mr. Nori, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir, I do.
Thank you. Mr. Hodge?
So this is a request for a special use permit pursuant to section 6.7.3.e and section 10.2.9 of the Unified Development Ordinance in order for the applicant to operate a hair salon out of her residence as part of a live-work unit out of the existing detached home located on a 0.33 acre property zoned residential 4 and located at 7201 Perry Creek Road. Here's an aerial of the property. Would note that there is a school across the street from the subject property. Here is a survey of the lot. They have a carport as well as a driveway, and they can support at least 3 standard parking spaces on the property, which would be the minimum required for a live-work permit. The code says 1 additional parking space. So that assumes in addition to the 2 spaces required for a single-family detached home. Staff can confirm that those parking spaces do meet the dimensional requirements. As for the general special use permit standard showings, staff will need, the applicant will need to demonstrate compliance with those. and they also have included in your application materials their responses to the Chapter 6 use regulations for the live work use, and they have demonstrated their adherence to those standards through those written statements. Ms. Castillo can go into further detail as it relates to any of those findings with use standards as part of her presentation. Staff has no additional comments or concerns with the request. So unless you have any questions of me at this time, that would conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Hodge. I do have a question. You indicate that the applicant will need to demonstrate compliance with UDO standards. Does that need to be done as part of this morning's presentation, or is that something that's done at a later date?
Well, it's a finding that the board will need to make. So you'll need to have some general appreciation for conformance with those 8 standard special use permit considerations, which are kind of generic across the board to all special use permits, regardless of the nature of the request. Things like they're compatible with adjacent uses in terms of location, scale, site design, those sort of standard kind of catch-all standards, of which there's been no specific information included in the written materials, other than they did provide responses to the general standard number 3, which is that it conforms to the specific use standards listed in Chapter 6. So their application does provide information as to conformance with the specific use standards for live work, but doesn't address the broader general special use permit standards, which admittedly are a little bit, in some cases, are broader than the nature of this specific request. For instance, the 8th finding is that any appropriate dedications of streets and utilities to the public will be made prior to the issuance of the building permit. In and of itself, this use, a live work use as an accessory use to the primary use on the property, which is a single family dwelling, does not trigger any of those requirements. So in this case, some of those are broader type of considerations, but you need to make sure that their request is not in violation. You don't feel like there's any shortcomings in terms of conformance with those general special use permit standards. And staff has no objections or foresee any issues with that, but it's something that needs to be part of your finding.
Mr. Swick, if I could take that question too. This is the legal standard, like a variance, that applicants always required to produce competent material substantial evidence as to each of the hardship standards. For a special use permit, the standards are listed. They're in the staff report starting on page 2, 1 through 8. And then one of those standards, as Eric described, number 3, is specific to another set of standards that have to do with the live work hair salon request, which the applicant has given written responses to those. But the applicant's required to show that they meet each one of those standards, 5 competent material substantial evidence, in order to be approved. And I think Eric's comment is that the applicant will have to, some of those, give you information on them. So if you have any questions, let me know.
This is Justin Sutton. I thought there were 14 standards per the application.
So the 14 standards are the things referenced in the special use permit standard number 3. So number 3 is that the proposed use complies with any specific use standard listed in Chapter 6 use regulations without the granting of a variance to the specific use standard. So those 14 points that Mr. Sutton is referencing are the additional use standards listed in Chapter 6. So there are 8 generic, kind of across the board, fairly subjective criteria for special use permits, regardless of the nature of the special use permit. And then any of those things that have a specific use standard, which live work does in Chapter 6, then those are 14 points listed therein. The first of which is that they have to apply for and get a special use permit, which the applicant is in the process of seeking.
Eric, are there 14 or 12? I'm seeing 12.
There's 14. They start on page 3 and they go to page 4 of the staff report.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
And then the applicant in their application has provided responses to those as well. And the application follows the staff report. Okay. And staff has no additional comment on the standards for the live work. Again, we're recognizing, just for the record, that there are at least 3 off-street parking spaces per the city's code requirements.
Okay, well, thank you both for that clarification. Any other questions from the board? Let's hear from the applicant then. Ms. Castillo, welcome.
Yes. Hello?
You have a presentation for us? You have something you wish to say?
Well, no, I have applied for this to just set up a small space at the house, inside the house, like a little station just so that I can cut hair. And I do have enough parking, like Mr. Hodge said, and I provided a survey. I think it supports that. So is anything else that you guys need from me or anything I need to do?
Well, if you have nothing more to offer, then we'll ask the board members if they have any questions for you. Any board members have any questions? I will note that if you look at the application, the response to the 14 standards under Chapter 6, that has been provided. I don't know if there are any other in the first 8 categories, if anyone has any questions about any of that or any questions for the applicant at all.
This is staff speaking, just noting that the live work standards for this type of business in a roundabout way do speak to the 8 standards that are general to special use permits. So there is some correlation indirectly between the two. So the board may be able to use the comments to those 14 specific use standards to make findings as it relates to the more broad category.
Okay. Thank you for pointing that out.
Rodney, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
How many customers would be on site at one time?
Lucy, that's for you.
One. I mean, I have small kids. I cannot really, I'm trying to do something here to help out in the household, and I have small kids. So, it permits, I think I can probably do one. I mean, I only have 2 hands. So, it's going to be something small. I'm not planning to do something. It's just something so that I can, help myself and help my husband. It's not something that I don't think people are going to be walking in there. And it's something that I will be doing by appointment. So.
Yeah. And you have parking available on site?
Yes, ma'am. I have the additional parking that you guys require.
Any other questions from the board?
Well, this is John Coons. I want to, are you going to put a sign on the house, or are you going to have to denote that you're in business, or talk to me briefly about what you're going to do on that regard?
If I can, yes, and I think you guys do allow that. I've read some information, and I will comply with it that you guys require. And this is why I'm doing this. I'm sure a lot of people operate from their home without not even complying, So anything that is, I'm trying to do this the right way, So anything that I need to do will be done.
The code limits signage for live work to 3 square feet and it needs to be affixed to the dwelling, so no freestanding signage.
Nor on the car. Yeah.
Correct.
The building. It has to be attached.
To be attached to the wall, yes, I understand.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Hodge, do you have any other questions?
I do not.
Okay, then let us move forward. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in support of this request? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the request? Then let's close the hearing and move on to board discussion or a motion.
Sean Coons, motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Coons. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Rudisill, we have a second from Ms. Rudisill. Is there any further discussion? We'll take a roll call vote.
Thank you, Mr. Coons.
Well, this is Justin Sutton. Was there, this may be an ancillary issue, was there a certification or evidence of certification to perform or to be able to do hair in this dwelling, or does the applicant have that?
I think you can ask that question of the applicant without having to open up the evidentiary hearing if you're asking reopening if you're asking a question. So I think the applicant is free to answer that.
Yes, I am a licensed hairstylist, cosmetologist, and I have already gone through the board and see what was the requirements, and this is the first step. They say you first need to go to the city of Raleigh, and then you have to come to us. So,
okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion, second, and we're moving to the voting portion. Mr. Pacino, go forward, please.
Thank you.
Al Pacino, sorry. Excuse me, Pacini.
Very distant cousin, as far away as possible. Anyway. All righty. Sorry. Mr. Coons?
Approve.
Thank you, Ms. Rudisill.
Approve.
Thank you, Chairman Swink.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mile.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton.
Approve.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Castillo. Good luck. Let us move along now to our last case of the morning. 8105 Grays Landing Way. This is a variance. A-180-19.
Okay, Mr. Chair, you have two people signed up to participate in this case, Toby Coleman and Brian Catchell. Again, when I state your name, please state your name for the record as well as your address and confirm your consent to proceed in this remote format. Toby Coleman.
This is Toby Coleman, 150 Fayetteville Street, Raleigh, North Carolina. I do consent to proceeding in this electronic format.
Okay, Mr. Coleman, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, and then Brian Catchell. Probably not.
Hi, this is Brian Catchell, live at 8105 Grays Landing Way, and I do give my consent.
And Mr. Catchell, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide in this evidentiary hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Hodge.
So this is a request for a 1.7-foot variance from the accessory structure side setback requirements set forth in section 2.2.1.c of the pre-2019 Unified Development Ordinance, and I'll go into that in a moment, that results in a side setback of 3.3 feet in order to permit a previously constructed freestanding outdoor fireplace accessory structure on a 0.45 acre property zone residential 4 and located at 8105 Grays Landing Way. So the reference to the pre-2019 UDO is reflective of the rules that were in place at the time of this construction activity and some associated pool permits. The applicants originally applied for this in the earlier part of 2019. However, at that time, it was sort of staff's thinking that they were unable to come to the Board of Adjustment because the Unified Development Ordinance currently has a prohibition on the board granting variances to accessory structures. However, this activity did occur in 2018, and some other permits associated with this chimney request were applied for, I believe, in 2018, or at least the activity occurred at that time, and the attorney's office has weighed in. I think Catherine may be able to provide some additional, if need be, comments, but basically there's some legislation known as the Permit Choice Act. Earlier iterations were not as specific about things as it relates to Board of Adjustment activity, and the legislation now is clear that Board of Adjustment activity is part of that Permit Choice Act, and so they're able to take advantage of the code and any variances or opportunities to come before the board that existed at the time. And so the current prohibition on the board granting variances to accessory structure rules, which are very different than they were back in 2019 as well, or pre-2019, really are not in play. So the board does have jurisdiction and authority to grant this sort of minor variance request to a rule that was previously in place. That said accessory structures essentially are to maintain a 5-foot side yard setback. And so if you can see in this aerial where the pool is, the sort of light blue on the north side of the house, the chimney that's in question before you today is located kind of behind that pool, if I'm not mistaken, and proximate to the neighboring property line. And it is 1.7 feet too close. So it's 3.3 feet from the property line. The code at the time wanted it to be 5 feet. The contractors that the homeowners used did not come forward, unfortunately, and seek permits at the time of the installation. So there was no inspection of the site prior to completion of the chimney that may have prevented it being sited too close to the property line. There's adequate room to have constructed it in conformance with the code had it been reviewed and inspected prior to construction, but that did not occur. Subsequent inspections for the pool revealed this chimney that had been installed as part of a previous construction activity on the site. Inspector noticed that was not on the plans and not been approved by the city. And so they attempted to rectify that. And that's when it was discovered that this was too close to the property line, and the rules were kind of in change at that point. And so this has been on hold for about a year to get straightened out, and then COVID hit and we kind of had a delay in projects coming forward. So it's just now making itself before the board. Staff has no particular objections to the request other than this is sort of a forgiveness of an oversight of not getting a permit. The applicant has provided information relative to the contractor who installed the work, having gone out of business, left a lot of people holding the bag, and the property owner has no ability to go back and try to work with the installer to correct their oversight. Here is a survey showing, again, the fireplace location there at the rear of the pool, adjacent to the neighbors to the north, which is the north is kind of to the right in this image. I believe there were some concerns and some attempts on the part of the applicant to work with a neighboring property owner to do recombination and move that property line such that it would be in compliance. but it's my understanding that there's a lender involved in the ownership of that neighboring parcel, and it gets complicated doing that sometimes when there are lenders involved, and so the neighbor backed away from working with the applicant. I don't believe there's any objection on their part, but they were unable to are unwilling to perform the recombination that would have resolved the code conflict outside of getting a variance. This is a picture showing the structure, and it's the fireplace itself that's within the setback, as I understand it. And so were it not for their ability to seek a variance, and if the board did not find hardship, et cetera, as required by the code and state law, the chimney in question, the only way to make it conform would be to demolish it and rebuild it further in, or just not have it on the property at all. So that's what's before you today. Unless you have any questions of me at this time, that would conclude my presentation.
Thanks, Mr. Hodge.
And Mr. Chair, I'd be glad to kind of clarify the legal issue here. Under today's UDO, the code prohibits asking for variances from this type of accessory structure setback UDO requirement. There is, as Eric mentioned, there's a law that was passed in July of 2019 that substantially modified what's called Permit Choice Act. It's the ability to pick which version of the rule you want to apply to you between the time you submit your application and when your application is approved or denied. And so in this situation, the applicant's attorney worked with our office to ensure that they followed underneath this new law, and they're asking to use the version of the UDO that was in place at the time they submitted their building permit application, which this new law allows them to do. So because at the time they applied for a building permit, the UDO allowed variances from this UDO section, this new law is allowing them to take advantage of that. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
Thank you. Appreciate the clarification. Board members, any questions for Mr. Hodge or Ms. Hill? No one? Okay. Mr. Coleman, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Swink. Good morning, board members. Thank you for your time. I guess, could you guys go forward 2 slides? I think you just went backwards 2 slides.
To this one?
Next one.
That one? This one?
No, then, yes, that one. What's going on? Anyway, the first slide with the white background, I guess, is the best way to do it. My name is Toby Coleman. I am an attorney, and I am representing the homeowners, Brian and Shelby Kakel. They have been sort of working with this issue for a while, and you know, I think Eric summarized things well. You know, this is a request to legalize a existing stone fireplace in their backyard, a small portion of which is located in the 5-foot side setback. Brian Kakel is here today with me, and you know, just to sort of give some background, you know, they back in 2016 they contracted with a fence and deck company called Robco to build the stone deck, outdoor fireplace and pergola that was on the, I think, slide before this one, Eric. You know, they are not, Brian and Shelby are not experts in the UDO or city permitting requirements. And so, you know, part of the contract with Robco, as is standard with most construction contracts, and that contract is in the packet we've submitted, you know, provides that Robco will build everything in compliance with all codes and requirements and will pull the necessary permits. As Eric mentioned, unfortunately, Robco didn't do what they needed to do. They didn't pull the permits. They built a small sort of triangle up the back of the chimney within the side setback, and because they didn't pull the permits, nobody caught it. until 28. It was built in 2016, 2018. A new in-ground pool was put in place. It was permitted, and so as part of that process, the air was caught. Nobody's ever complained about the chimney. This is not an issue where neighbors have complained about it. This is my humble opinion, but it's quite an attractive feature. The error might never have been noticed if it weren't for the fact that they went through the pool process. Basically what's happened is Brian and Shelby have been trying to work through this problem since 2018 when it was first raised by the city. And they've been trying to do it through proper channels without having to incur the significant expense of demolition and reconstruction. This was a project that cost tens of thousands of dollars to build, and demolition and reconstruction would also have a significant cost. I would submit to you this is a classic case where the strict application of the ordinance would impose unnecessary hardship in the form of demolition and reconstruction. Eric, if you can go to the next slide. So as Eric pointed out, the area, the fireplaces, that area pointed out, it's in a highlighted area. It's that sort of rectangle that's diagonal. The northern portion back of the fireplace is actually outside of the setback. It's just that the southern, or I guess the bottom end, which I guess is, I think, east actually, but the bottom end of it is 3.3 feet from the fence. And so it's slightly within, there's a small portion of it that is within the setback, and that's the area that we're talking about. This is a case where geometry plays a little bit of a role. The property is at the end of a cul-de-sac, and so it's shaped a little bit like a piece of pie, with the widest portion of the property being at the back, which is all tree conservation area where nothing can be built. So the fireplace and the patio are next to the house in a relatively narrow side yard. If you go to the next slide, Eric. And this is just a quick timeline. What I'll note again is just, this was something that, contractor was hired to do the work. They were hired to get the permits. They didn't get the permits. It was built, and the issue wasn't caught until 2 years later. At which point, this is sort of the sad part of the story. So Robco in 2018, when this issue comes up, Brian and Shelby say, "Hey, wait a minute." Robco goes and tries to pull a permit belatedly. That's when the issue of the location of the fireplace becomes an issue. Robco stops responding in the winter of 2019 or so, and so Brian and Shelby have very little left to do except sort of try to work with the city. They get a survey on their own. They find this issue out. They try to work with Robco. Unfortunately, Robco in 2019 was hitting severe financial hardship. And Eric, if you go to the next slide, as Eric mentioned, Robco suddenly closed last fall, and basically left a whole bunch of customers with sort of holding the bag, who had made deposits and couldn't get their refunds. We had actually talked with Robco as part of this entire process, trying to make sure, sort of saying, "Hey, we'll go get the variance, and then if it doesn't work out, you guys will be on the hook." Unfortunately, they've gone out of business. So, for Brian and Shelby, the issue is basically if they can't get this variance, they are, in order to get their pool permitted, in order to be in compliance with city code, without a variance, they're going to have to, incur significant expense to demolish this stone fireplace. As Eric mentioned, we did seek to try to find other ways around it, especially after it became clear that after there were some questions raised about whether we could even seek this variance. I did on behalf of Brian and Shelby explore with the neighbors the possibility of doing essentially what's known as a recombination of land to make to create a 5-foot setback for the entire fireplace. I'm sort of going to that extreme just to sort of make sure that we met all the code. Unfortunately, when you have, they're both homes with mortgages. And unfortunately, you have to get mortgage lenders to sign off on all of that. And the neighbors were doing it as a favor. They didn't really have an issue with it. But once it became clear that they're going to have to go to their lender and sort of go through that entire process, they said, this is way too much for us. If you go to the next slide, Eric. So just to give you a sense, this is the back. This is the area on the left is the area that's slightly too close. As you can see, it's well landscaped. It's attractive, and it's it's well placed and not looming over the fence. So I'm going to hand it over to. I'd ask Brian just to give a brief statement, and then we'll be available for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Toby, and thank you, board, for listening to us and hearing the case. I appreciate everything Mr. Coleman has done in the last year. It's been quite exhausting. Over 2 years, I've been trying to do the right thing here and remediate the position we've been put in. We did everything we thought we were supposed to do. We researched and hired a reputable licensed contractor, and he failed to do what he was obligated to do. So it's been really, really difficult for us in trying to find the right way forward here. We had nothing but the best intentions for our yard and the neighborhood. The HOA has no concerns, fully supportive, as are all of my neighbors. It is very much in line with the rest of the neighborhood. And if you look at that aerial, you see everyone's got hardscaped backyards, and everyone quite enjoys being out in their yards. So I'm looking forward to resolving, and I'm here to answer any other questions that you may have. And thanks again.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Coleman, anything else?
No, we are available for questions as needed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cagle. Mr. Coleman, board members, any questions for either of the applicants? Mr. Hodge, any questions on your part?
No additional questions.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else here wishing to speak in support of this request? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the request? If there are no further questions from anyone, then we'll close the hearing and we'll move it to the board for deliberations and a motion.
I make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Ms. Rudisill. Do we have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Mr. Mile. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion or questions? All those in favor, we'll have a roll call vote.
Thank you, Ms. Rudisill.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mile.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Swank.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Coons.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton.
Approve.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That concludes our cases for this morning. Thank you, Mr. Coleman and others. Let us move along to our business of the day. A quick clarification. When I opened the meeting, I introduced Mr. Butler is in attendance. I believe he was not in attendance. Just want to be sure, Ralph, that you got that correct. I misspoke. I think everyone else was here. Let's move on to the minutes from our last meeting. Anyone have any questions or corrections? I think I had one thing, but I think it was resolved in a conversation with Ms. Hill, so I think I'm okay. Anyone else have anything about the minutes? I have a motion?
Motion to approve minutes. John Coons.
Mr. Coons, thank you for motion to approve. A second?
Second.
Ms. Rudisill will give you that one. All those in favor, do we need a roll call vote on this one, Ralph?
Yeah, I would say too. I think I would do a roll call vote.
Okay.
Okay.
Just to be extra careful under this new law.
Absolutely. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Coons.
Approve.
Ms. Rudisill.
Approve.
Mr. Swink,
Approve.
Mr. Mile,
Approve.
Mr. Sutton.
Approve.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hill, anything from you today?
No, nothing to report.
Okay. Anyone else have any other business?
John Coons, these are really good minutes, by the way. Whoever took these, they're just really good. I think they're as thorough as I've ever seen and exact. Just wanted to put that in there.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. They are very thorough. I like that myself. I again want to thank you all. This is an interesting process. It's not always smooth, but it's working along nicely. Staff members, appreciate your input and support in all this. And with that, I guess we'll stand adjourned until we meet again.
Thank you.
Take care.
everyone.
All right, everybody take care and have a great month.
Thank you very much.